And here we are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. There's always a kind of, that awkward moment where you get people just join in and you have to kind of sit here in silence. But I'm not very good at that, so I just mumble.
It's the lag delay. It's the lag delay for an event. It's always standard. It's always to be expected.
Yeah. And I'm just not very good at it. I'm just not very good at sitting in silence. It's just awkward for me. So I always just mumble along a little bit and just do this basically. I probably talk about it the exact same thing every single time I go live, but it makes me feel a bit more comfortable.
There's probably a bit of research there that we could talk about around the anxiety of live events that's been caused over the last 3 years of people doing more and more live events. And I think it's up there along with the "you're on mute" and can you give me permission to share, please? Are probably some of the biggest anxiety driving terms that I've heard on any live thing. So it's completely understandable.
Can you see my screen? That's one. Can you see this yet? It's not working. Oh, what's happened here? No, I know what you mean. It's one of those, isn't it? And there's probably some sort of insecurity about silence as well. We'll brush over it like the rest of the issues. Anyway, dude, I'm super stoked to have you on here and have this conversation. It's kind of been probably on the books for a long time. I think we've kind of known each other for 2 years now.
Yeah, best part of 2 years.
Best part of 2 years. I think it was Mad where we kind of officially met, wasn't it?
Finally in 3D or in person as opposed to through a screen and through messaging.
Yeah, basically. Isn't that how you meet people nowadays, through a screen?
Exactly. Always.
Anyway, if you're joining us, welcome. We are obviously taking questions. So if you are here, please say hello, write in the comments. It should pop up to our right hand side, so we'll see that. I will obviously, if you have any questions and you want to ask Jake throughout, please just pop them down. I will ask, and we will just kind of comment through as we go along. I won't interrupt Jake if he's in a good piece of information. Just ask a question, but please just put them in there. Also helps me kind of find some questions whilst I'm listening. Anyway, before we get started, let me just introduce myself. And if you're one of Jake's contacts who've just come along, it's nice to meet you. My name is Rich. I'm the founder and director of Employees Health, a workplace wellbeing and coaching company. It looks at both the workplace and what they're doing for wellbeing, but we also look at the individual, both from a performance standpoint through coaching, as well as a wellbeing standpoint through education and how people can live their best lives. If you want to know more, just drop me a message. I'll answer it. But that's the boring kind of sales pitch done. The more important person here is obviously Jake. Jake, say hello.
Hi, everybody. As Rich said, so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Rich said it's been a long time coming. It's been cool to share some thoughts, share some ideas. To cover off just on a top level, I currently work at Philip Morris International, supporting on Global Wellbeing Initiatives. My role is coming to an end over the next 3 weeks, so I'm just in the last couple of weeks of delivering Movember, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment. Before I go on to have what is, and we'll talk about this today as well, but what is some well-earned rest, some time to recharge through the rest of the year before looking at some new and exciting opportunities in the new year. So share some insight from here, but also from the last kind of 7 years of workplace well-being as a whole.
Yeah, love it. And so we might as well cover Movember first, right? Like it's the thing that we can see when we look at your screen. You've got the nice t-shirt, you've got the nice Mo rocking. If you don't know Jake is doing some pretty great but horrendous things to himself on Saturday coming. So can you just kind of give us a bit more information about what you're doing and how we can support you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought I'd be very on brand today. So mustache, freshly shaven, t-shirt on, although I'm flipped, so it's here. It's the 20th anniversary of Movember. So Movember as a charity is 20 years old this year. It's something that is pretty close to my heart in terms of both from a men's health perspective from my time working in insurance companies, men actually getting checked and men engaging in health and well-being as a whole. But also recently the impacts and especially the highlights of COVID around men's mental health and the work being done there. I think it's super important. So yeah, on Saturday I'm going to be walking 60 kilometers while carrying 2 weighted vests to the weight of 60 kilos, which is just a representation of the weight men carry and the fact that we lose 60 men every hour to suicide. So it's an area that Movember have done huge amounts of work around. Prostate cancer, testicular cancer are 2 big things that they've made massive inroads on. Men's mental health is one of the things that the campaigns around conversations is a massive one. But it's now really digging into the why around men's mental health, and I think it's super important initiative to back, and it's super important to me, and that's why I speak about it, because it's it's close to the heart.
Yeah, 100%. I could resonate with that as well. And as a fellow Mo bro, which after this weekend will be there. I've been told I have to keep it for my birthday weekend. So I will be there with you. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to watch you suffer over 60 kilometers, I'm busy. But yeah, dude, I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. I know you'll crush it. But yeah, the more we can share awareness around this fantastic charity and raise money to help them with their research and kind of support more men in their health challenges, mental health included in that. I think it's super important. All right, the well-being topic, simplifying well-being with Jake Saunders. So, you've been in this industry now kind of 7 years, as you alluded to. Can you tell us kind of how you've got to where you are? What your story, kind of what your journey's been to now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we put in the bio, I call myself a failed sports scientist, which I always smile at because it's what I studied. I thought that what I wanted to be and everything I wanted to do was to be a hotshot sports scientist. And I say that because there was a lot of ego and there was a lot of identity and tied into that and the direction I wanted to be in. Until I actually got there and started working in sports science and realized I really didn't enjoy the environment and I really didn't enjoy being a sports scientist, which when that's everything you've set yourself up to be, it's quite a challenging conversation to have with yourself to go, actually, that's not what I want to do. So long story short, effectively just moved back home with not an idea about what to do, how to do, or what I was going to do. And I basically lent on the thing that I knew best, which is coaching. And I did a really interesting project in my year in industry. So I did a sandwich university degree. So my year in industry, I basically worked on creating a community public health program. So getting people moving, talking about nutrition, sleep, stress in a very top level point of view, and then creating a reward program based on nudge theory, basically where everyone who came to the community program could donate money into the pot with the chance of there were prizes given out every 4 to 6 weeks where that pot was just given back to people. So there's no money created from it or no money generated from it. It was purely doing that. And I had 200 people training in the local park and then having a 5-minute conversation afterwards with me 3 times a week, which was pretty cool. And really brought in, that's what I love, is working with people and doing that. So that got me an opportunity where I actually then ran a PT studio in Northampton with the view of effectively how do we deliver this, so behavior change, physical activity, and then the behaviors outside of the gym to our clients and to a client base of around 150 people. So that was really fun. It was about 2 years really hands-on PTing, as well as looking at the strategic side of how we build the services around that. So how do we bring in digital technology for tracking? How do we deliver the other services around what we're doing? And that was so important for us. To keep it super short, because I can go down this rabbit hole, it opened up an opportunity where I saw Vitality Health Insurance were looking for people to come in and to be one of the first in the door to engage small corporates in the Vitality Health program. So people that were already clients, how do we capture these companies with between 100 to 500 people? How do we capture their attention so they really engage in health and well-being activities? So going and delivering workshops, working with HR teams to actually build that understanding and engagement in the program, which was really, really, really cool. It was really, really interesting. Exposure to lots of different companies and lots of different sizes. And that's then led me down the road of working with Virgin Pulse for a couple of years. And then for the last 18 months being in an internal role with Philip Morris, which has been hugely educational. Seeing, we have 80,000 people in 92, 93 countries. A complex matrix system is what it's called, where there's a lot of population in lots of different places and lots of methodology. So we have to have a global philosophy that's then delivered and locally relevant to people. So that's the whistle stop tour of the last 7 years as such.
Yeah. I mean, similar background to me, and Bianca, who was on the other week, which we both know and friends of that kind of health first and moving into this kind of the well-being in the workplace kind of role. And with your role within PMI, I know that it is a tough role due to the size. I don't know how much you can say. What's the biggest challenges dealing with 80,000 people?
I think this with a company, any large company, and anyone who works in a large company will know, it's around the number of moving parts, the number of people, and ultimately you have to have governance structures in place to allow anything to happen well. And that in itself causes challenges. So it's just working with different nationalities, different personalities, time zone as well. As you can imagine, I sit here in the UK. That I've over the last 18 months had calls with Australia, have had calls with South America. Finding a time, especially if you try and do a global event, I think that's one of the things, is finding a time that suits people is impossible. So it's how you cater for everyone in certain ways, and that personalization is super important in that as well.
Yeah, cool. So I don't want to pass over that quite quickly, but it's quite kind of informational, kind of educational, I guess, in regards to what you've done. But because of obviously all that experience you've got, you kind of built up this philosophy and approach to how to well-being at work and how you think that's done well. Can you just kind of explain now what that means to you and kind of how people can use that going forward?
Yeah, completely. I think, and it's a word that I use a lot, which is accountability. And accountability is the foundation of the philosophy that I've built around well-being, because accountability is something which I see all the time get misunderstood and misconstrued about what it actually means. And I think if we boil it down into its simplest terms, it's us as individuals, we are 100% accountable for our own health. I have to wake up every day, and the actions and the behaviors that I exhibit on a day-to-day basis are exactly how my health shows up, right? So I think that's a super important thing. And often when we see conversations around workplace wellbeing, especially, we seem to try and absolve the individual of their responsibility. Now, by saying you as an individual, you and I as individuals are wholly accountable for our health and well-being, it doesn't remove the responsibility from the organization. I think sometimes people see it as being mutually exclusive, or if one exists, then the other can't. And that's completely not true. And again, this is an opinion, but I think it's possible for us to say you as an individual are entirely responsible for your own health, and we as an organization are responsible for giving you the tools, the time, and the resource to engage in positive health habits, whether that be during work time or outside of work time, depending on the needs and the flexibility that you have, as well as making sure that we design the work that you do on a day-to-day basis in a way which doesn't come at a detriment to your health. And I think it's important that both those things can exist at the same time, and you can have push and pull either way with both of those. And then in the middle, you have the pieces that we hear about all the time, the ways in which we work together, the boundaries that we set, how we bring psychological safety into the workplace, and the behaviors that our leadership exhibit. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's something that we would class as the organization. That's classed as how we as human beings interact with each other, which the organization can set the tone and the direction, but it's down to us as individuals and us as teams to really have those difficult conversations of what that means for us. Because if you set, and you see it all the time, if you set a blanket policy, often what happens is that then there's always an exception to the rule. There's always an exception, and there's always someone that becomes worse off or someone that becomes better off. And I think if we can reduce the amount that we put in big policies, which there are some areas, absolutely, there are policies needed, but the more that we can allow teams, leadership to have those conversations around boundaries for themselves, with the view of, I'm wholly responsible for my own health. The organization is going to provide me the tools, the time, the resource, and also make sure my work doesn't come at a detriment to my health. Then in the middle, you can have those conversations. And I think if we approached well-being where we only ever looked at those three pillars and those things that are going on, and then we look at, well, where does this initiative, when there's a conversation about doing an initiative, where does this fit in? What is it? Is it a tool? Is it about giving employees time? Is it working on our teamwork? Is it looking at leadership behaviors? Is it something to help us with work design? You can start to categorize where it is, and then that can give you the position to then start to look at, okay, is this an effective intervention? Is this something effective that's going to support the direction of travel that we want as an organization towards positive health? And I think that's I say about simplifying well-being. That's a super simple way of looking at it. But actually it means that we all have accountability to each other. And to kind of close that accountability piece off, I think a big foundation of accountability is trust. And you hear it, without trust, there is no accountability. And without accountability, there is no trust. And a really nice example of this is if we think back to mid-2020, when it's in the UK, lockdown starting to come in place, workplaces were starting to close. I had the experience where both my boss and my company at the time turned around and went, we don't really know what's going on. We're going to work this out. This is what we're doing to work it out at the time. Can you feed back to us and just work it out with us? And we're working to make sure that everybody's safe. That's the intention, but we actually don't know where we're going. So we need some support in working this out. And then everyone in the company just went, yeah, cool. I can get on board with that. I can work with you. And we can have this shared accountability in terms of the fact is, I'm going to tell you what I need, and you're going to tell me why you're working on it or why you're not working on it. And that open communication built some really big trust between employers and employees. And I know I have spoken to some people where they didn't have that experience, but I've spoken to a lot of people where they have had that experience. And I think that it's quite funny that we had a really strong example 3 years ago where everyone did something. It worked really well in terms of gaining engagement from employees. And a lot of companies aren't doing that anymore. Just simply saying, this is the direction of travel we want to work in, and this is how we're going to do it. Please give us feedback. And everyone stopped doing that. Or I haven't seen too many organizations continue to do that. So I think that's, if you were to say one thing from that philosophy, it's tell your employees what you're doing. Tell them what you're doing and ask for their feedback, and then do that regularly. And that will build trust, and the accountability thing will start to take care of itself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when we initially had a coffee over this, didn't we? And I'm very much one of the same thought processes. I control everything I do, think, actions, behaviors, and so I have full control over how I am and my health, right? And I buy into that completely. But then it's the challenge is to get other people to buy into that same process, because I think some people don't buy into that and will try and look elsewhere for people to look after their health. But then how does the organization and your team then optimize your opportunity to do that as well? And so that's kind of what I would kind of ask you here is, you mentioned about these big blanket policies that organizations can try and steer away from. But what can organizations do, these large, medium-sized, lots of people kind of organizations do to keep that really simple for the organization?
Well, I think, first of all, in terms of the challenges around accountability, one of the big reasons why I think we have challenges with accountability is that piece around people thinking that by saying you're wholly responsible for your health, it absolves the organization. And if you kind of say, look, it's not the same thing, and it's like the same way of going, you're entirely in control of your bank account, but it doesn't mean it absolves the government from responsibility for doing things which are going to create the opportunities for you to have money in your bank account, kind of thing. They're not, like I said, it's not mutually exclusive. So I think it's important to really hit home that we're not saying, or I'm not saying that you're wholly responsible, and that means that I get off scot-free. It's about joint accountability. I think that's a big thing. And some of the big ways in which that can be done, I think, from a top level, annual leave is a big one. People taking a narrative around annual leave, and it's also not necessarily policy, but the role modeling that leadership display is one of the most powerful drivers of any behavior in an organization. Like, there's so many times where I've tried to get things moving in certain initiatives in multiple companies, and a note from a CEO just suddenly everything moves. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but it shows how powerful role modeling is, and it shows how powerful. So I think the more that we can upskill our leaders to demonstrate the behaviors that we want, or the behaviors that we know are positive to people's health and well-being, then that's going to have more impact than saying, oh, you have to be in the office 3 days a week, or oh, we're going to give you this amazing flexible benefits platform, because they're all fantastic tools, don't get me wrong, but it's the behaviors which really drive that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So I've got a challenge for you around that, because you see this, and me and you will both share this kind of information all the time. We know the impact of someone looking after themselves, turning up as their best selves, and making sure that they're fit and healthy. Right? We know what that impact has for their organization. How then do you get these leaders who aren't showing up on social media, on LinkedIn, or into meetings, that they buy into? How do you get them to role model, and how do you start? How do you get that person to make them understand that with this like intervention and process, you're going to get your people turning up and performing better for your organization?
So I think the biggest piece is that it doesn't have to be a big public showing. I think sometimes that's where people get lost. One of the things that we looked at from a wellbeing champions perspective is that, and people have different methodologies, whether it's mental health first aiders, wellbeing champions, that kind of peer-to-peer network that you have within an organization. One of the big things that I think has a change in those networks is when you talk about it not being for the whole organization, but being for a team. So rather than a leader influencing the entire organization or inspiring outside the organization, the immediate people that they work with, they're the people that they're going to have the most impact on. Because it is like the people that I work with, the people I speak to day to day, my behavior is going to impact them the most first before it impacts anybody else. And again, that it comes down to the accountability, because then if you're accountable to a handful of people, and you go, okay, I'm going to show up well for you. And I think that's the conversation, because it can be daunting to say that you're an influence on 100 people, 50 people, 2,000 people, or in our case, 80,000 people. It can be that can be a daunting thing for someone to hear, when actually maybe that's not what they wanted from their job in the first place. So it's about the immediate impact on their team and the immediate impact on the people they spend the most time with. And also, you'll probably find that people are a little bit more willing to make changes in their behavior for those people, because they see the whites of their eyes. They have a relationship of some kind with them. There's a connection beyond simply just working together. So I think that's the place to start, is try and bring things down to the smallest common denominator, which is the immediate people that leaders work with. And then that can have a big impact beyond, because as we know, the behavior cascades. So rather than it just being it's that leader with their team, then each of those people with their team, and then it bubbles away as a whole.
Yeah, falls down the stream, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I guess then, looking at what you've been doing and how you've been doing it, how have you implemented that? Because when we spoke, you mentioned that you openly speak about these three different elements, right, consistently within the organization. You share this is your ideology, this is your philosophy, and how your wellbeing strategy looks. What's that buy-in then from what you've been doing over the last 18 months, I guess?
It's massive. It's massive. So one of the big ways of doing that has been working hands-on, because we have effectively 92 countries, so there's a lot of hands-on work doing that. So it's around meeting countries where they are, talking about the challenges that they have, and then being very, very targeted within that space. Another thing is around, we need to have different people around the table. So when we look at well-being, and this is one of the things I say around simplifying it, is that well-being touches everything in the organization, right? So it's often, if you leave it in an HR function, or you leave it in a singular function that only works in that function, then it kind of stays there. But if you start to enroll the other areas of the business, sustainability, learning and development, looking at the leadership development pathways that are in place, it's how do you bring those people around the table and talk about how well-being impacts their particular area.
Mhm.
And then you start to have, it's not just then an HR issue, or it's not just a well-being team issue. It becomes a whole organization issue, and then that's things like work design and everything can start to have an impact. So that's something at PMI. There's a wellbeing advisory group, which is a cross-functional working group, which is had a huge impact, and I will take no credit for this. This was work that was done beforehand, to bring in those different people to have those discussions, from all the way from benefits, because well-being and benefits are hugely intertwined, but it isn't the only area. And I think that often when we look at, for example, benefits have a huge impact on the individual, and then we need to start, which is fantastic, because then we can work with third parties to look after the individual side of health. And there are so many providers. I mean, we all know, there are so many providers providing different things around individual health. We can work really hands-on, and there are some fantastic examples of initiatives that were done, and there are some examples of initiatives that didn't go so well. And I don't particularly want to sit here and say good things about one thing and bad things about another, because for organizations, those things are different, and it's how the organization at the time shows up. So I think it wouldn't be fair for me to do that. But I think the other side of it is that by working with third parties and working with people in that instance, it allows you the freedom to then look at those pieces. Like I said, how we design work, how we bring leadership behaviors through, how do we foster psychological safety. Those things which are all there are super, super important.
Yeah, completely agree with you. It's interesting, the extent in which you're bringing all these different elements together, and it does play a huge role, right?
Yeah, and I think in that instance, and we've been and I know that we've been to events where people talking about, as a well-being lead, it's just them, or you've got some organizations where you have massive teams, and some organizations where there's one or two people. And I actually think that, again, coming down to the term of simplifying well-being, is that your well-being lead role is a coordinator, because ultimately, like, well-being isn't in one area, as we've said, it's in all the areas. The sustainability have a huge amount of reporting responsibility, even to IT. Things like super small thing in Microsoft 365 at PMI, we have something called micro breaks, which means that meetings have to finish 5 minutes early as a rule in Microsoft. Now, you need IT's buy-in to be able to do anything. I mean, if anyone's worked with an IT team, you have to really, really work hard to demonstrate the need for changes to the systems. So it touches everything. So your role, I believe that the role is as a coordinator. It's about getting the right people around the table at the right time to have the right conversations, and defining exactly what the the move forward is and how it impacts everyone in the business from a positive light. Part of that is measurement. Part of that is, value on investment or return on investment, which we can talk about at a very top level. But that coordination, doing that coordination well, means that you don't need large delivery teams, because the large delivery teams are already the teams delivering the work. It's just bringing that well-being lens and that philosophy into all the work streams across the organization. And I think that's starting to happen across some organizations. I can see it in a few, which is looking really cool. And I think that moves us beyond simply putting on a webinar here and a webinar there, but having an integrated and cohesive philosophy, which then has tools that play into that. I think that's how we really bring well-being forward and out of a nice to have or a fluffy thing, which we seem to be slipping a little bit back into.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that. I mean, being on this side of things, I think companies definitely see it as this nice to have thing, and it's interesting. And I like the way that because you see it, and I speak to so many people within wellbeing lead roles or wellbeing roles, that they are so spread, and their role isn't, especially in the new wellbeing lead roles, and you're seeing more advertised that they don't really know what that is. And then it's interesting you say it's a coordinator. It's just pulling everybody together to make sure everybody's on the same page to the philosophy they've created for that organization and their people, right?
Yeah, I think it's setting the direction to travel.
Yeah.
It's like saying, this is where we want to get to. These are the metrics that are around that. And then here's how we can make an impact on that. And I think then as well, for people within organizations, people might be more responsive to that as well, because then it's not well-being being dictated to them. It's well-being that they're self-creating, and that has a huge impact.
And also, it doesn't need engagement for that. It doesn't need overly too much engagement from every individual to do that, because you're changing culture. The engagement needs to come from the people at the top level who have brought this person in, who wants to improve their well-being of their people. That's where the engagement has to happen and buy-in has to happen, because then you're changing this culture, right? Whereas I'm seeing it a lot. I've worked with companies with lots of people in it, but you get really low engagement scores, really low engagement numbers, because people aren't engaged and don't want to engage on an online course anymore. Whereas if you're engaging and getting the people to organise in a workshop, I'm not down selling my services, but you know what I mean, right? Again, 10 to 20 people turn up for a whole company organizational wide webinar, but when you're actually getting the coordinator to coordinate every single team and work with every single team to make sure that they're thriving, then I think you're going to get so much more out of it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that it has a huge impact in terms of it not being like a well-being washing, which is obviously a term which is growing again. It's coming through, is that are people just doing things to make it look good? And then also, a quote that I steal from Ryan Hopkins, our friend, all the time, is that bit around, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's so true that you can have the fanciest, the most detailed, the most intricate strategy, but if no one else knows about it, and that's also within your own organization, if no one else actually knows what you're trying to do, then the direction of travel is going to be super slow. So it's around setting that direction of travel, enrolling other teams and other areas of the business in that direction of travel, and then you're all pulling towards the same thing. And then it's like when IT are deciding on a new system, suddenly they'll be thinking about it from a usability point of view, and the experience that's going to go through for the employees to make that change. And then you look at sustainability, and it's like, oh, how are we tracking and reporting on things? It starts to show up in everything that we do. Learning and development, suddenly it's integrated into, if you've got new people managers, suddenly we're teaching them about the role modeling, the behaviors that we want them to exhibit to do so. And I do think that that's where a lot of us are traveling, and that's where a lot of us are trying to get to.
Or where people need to go to, who are a little bit behind us.
Yeah, exactly.
DJ, I agree with you 100%. You've covered a couple of things off which I was going to ask you about anyway, which is great. The last one, obviously, is this measuring measuring all of the stuff we spoke about to get to understand our impact, and then what makes the biggest impacts, I guess, as well. Then also how then you're creating the strategy. So is there an area you want to cover first? Do you think it's a bit more important to cover the strategy, how we create the strategy and then measuring it, or measurement to then create the strategy?
I think we'll start with measurement, because ultimately, if you look at wellbeing strategies as a whole, everyone's kind of converged in the same space. Like, if you go to any conference or session at the moment, you'll hear that everyone pretty much talks about physical needs, psychological needs, self-fulfillment, and financial as kind of 4 areas. And then there'll be different versions or different language used to talk about those 4 things, but everyone talks about those 4 things. From a strategy perspective, I believe that purely looks at the individual. So that's kind of where we can talk about, that's looking after the individual health, compelling program, work with benefits to produce the tools, the time, the resources, and organization. That's a super simple. If you wanted to take a cookie cutter wellbeing strategy, that's it. Those 4 topics. Make sure you've got tools, times, resources, and if you produce that alongside work design, that's pretty much what you want to do. The bit around defining, measuring, and taking action actually as a strategy to where are we at and where are we going, that is all down to measurement and measuring the right things. And the project that we've just finished is looking at how can we really measure well-being across a whole organization, but also how can we measure what we're doing. And I think that's something that that no one is necessarily doing in this way yet. I think it's a pretty cool project, and it's I'm really excited by the work. And effectively, what we've been looking at is, what are we doing as an organization? So effectively, the pieces that make up our strategy, how are we delivering it? What's the engagement like? How are we communicating it? And how are we getting leaders to enroll in that? So we've got 14 criteria across those areas, which effectively builds a score of what do we have in place for people to be well. So it's kind of the what are we doing? Everyone has, in some way, shape, or form, every organization has some way that they're measuring engagement in their company. They're asking some questions. We have a series of questions on well-being, psychological safety, things like that, which effectively makes up the second part of our score, which is how people feel. So what are we doing, and how are people feeling? And then the final piece, which is not something that we've done at PMI, and it's not something that has been done at PMI, but it's definitely something that I've had conversations with a lot of intelligent people in the space, is how to bring the final part of this score is then what are the outcomes coming. And the outcomes is a really, really important thing. So it's, are people leaving? Are people sick? Are people taking their holiday? And are people engaging in a health check? And I think a health check is probably one of the most overlooked tools in a wellbeing arsenal. But I think especially when we look at public health, and especially bring it back to that first bit around November, the thing that causes damage to people is the thing that they don't know that they don't know. And that's why I'm so passionate about health checks being a front and center part of well-being as a whole.
We do those, by the way.
You do those.
Sorry,
that wasn't a deliberate plug, but that's a good segue. But I think when you start looking at those 3 things, it's then you can start to define your direction of travel. Because if you think you're doing all the right things, so you measure, are we doing the right things? And you think you're doing all the right things, but people are telling you that they're really not happy, then there's a disconnect between what you're doing and what people are feeling. So then you can go, okay, why is there a disconnect? So then that's where your strategy focus is that disconnect. If you think you're doing all the right things and people are feeling good, but then lots of people are leaving, lots of people are sick, and people aren't taking holidays, then you've got to look at, okay, there's a disconnect between what people are telling us and what people are actually doing. So then that's the area that we need to focus. And then if you measure the things you're doing, and then you go, oh, actually, there's lots of gaps in what we're actually doing. And yes, okay, maybe people are feeling good and maybe people aren't leaving yet, but possibly later down the line, we might have an issue if we don't address this, then we can start to work on that. So I think too many people are trying to look at well-being as like a single question or a single score. But if you start building these kind of indexes where it's going, okay, so is it what we're doing? Is it what people are feeling? Or is it what people are doing? That then gives you the opportunity to go, okay, so that's the thing we need to work on over the next 12 months. So that's what we're going to look at specifically from a measurement perspective. And we're going to focus on that area and transforming that. And I think that helps with the strategy piece. The strategy is always the same. It's how do we engage people in a healthy, more active lifestyle where people aren't made ill by coming to work. How you deliver that has some flexibility depending on size of organization, what people are telling you. But I think ultimately that's where your strategy sits.
Yeah. And from what I'm hearing, I love the idea of that measurement piece and how you're doing that over 3 different kind of focus areas. But that's going to take time, right? How do you envision that being recorded? Is it just surveys? Is it like data you're taking? Is it how are you measuring that, and how often? And then how long do you perceive all this stuff to kind of really make your ROI, I guess?
Yeah, so I would say that my opinion with questionnaires for employees is whichever cadence you have currently, it's good not to change it because people are used to it. So it's kind of what's been done, unless you're going to reduce the amount that you survey people, which is always good because I'm sure we've all had a time where we've had to complete a survey and it's not particularly, it's not the best use of our time for us in that moment. For us as an individual, completely selfishly, it's like, that's not the best use of my time right now. But I think that surveys get more traction when you start to tell people what you've learned from them and what action you're taking. So going back to that piece around trust. So surveying, whether it's once a year, twice a year, there are lots of people much more intelligent than me that can tell you about surveying. I'm very fortunate that in my career so far, that I've been able to work with those people, and I can lean on them basically to do that part of measurement, which is that I just know what I want to get out of it. And again, it comes back to that coordination part. Wellbeing lead is a specialist generalist, ultimately, right? Looking at what are we doing, again, there'll be some processes built into the business where you're already looking at that, like benefits reviews, actions taken, planning for the year around how you're going to improve people. So that you can probably do as a leadership team every year, is going, are we doing all the right things? And you can change those frameworks based on the literature's changing every year. I think this year has been one of the years I've seen the most scientific literature, not provider reports, which are very valuable, but the year I've seen the most scientific literature about really hands-on practical advice around measuring well-being in the workplace. There have been some really good papers this year, and I think that will really help shape what we do. But ultimately, you can do that on a yearly basis, and the outcomes again is a yearly basis as well, because every organization is tracking attrition in some way, shape, or form. They're tracking sick days, they're tracking annual leave, but it's just looking at it through the lens of well-being. If these are drivers of well-being, so where is the gap? And it's that gap analysis that is the piece that really brings the transformation, I think. And to put it out there, there's a super simple tool that you can in PMI, and we've done some work with Deloitte on this. But we've adapted the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's maturity matrix. So it's healthy people, healthy business. If you look at it, it's a fantastic paper to read. It's super top level. We've done a lot of work on it, but it's a fantastic place to start from if you just want to get some inspiration about how to start measuring that what are we doing part. That's the foundation. How people are feeling. There are lots of people that talk about measuring how people are feeling, and you can probably go, there is a list longer than my arm of suppliers that can do that. And then the attrition part, it's then just really looking at it in detail, and are we capturing this data? And I think that's where the return on investment piece comes in. It's ultimately it's the outcomes.
Yeah.
Everything else, we know most wellbeing apps will have an engagement rate of around 30 to 40%. Most of the time, if you look at population health, it's probably going to represent the population of the country that you're in. which I think is sometimes an oversight that people have. It's like, if you want to know how healthy your employees are without spending too much money, look at the public health report of the country. It's probably going to be the same, unless you are a highly specialized, unique industry. Sometimes, like, we hear things like about law and things like that, particularly stressful environments. But general rule of thumb, you can go from the public health perspective of the country, and that's where you can take action from and start to build that image of what's going to really make a difference.
Yeah, dude, that's super helpful. Good resources as well to use, and good ways to use that measurement and how to measure as well, which is great. We are at the 45-minute mark. I always finish our podcast and our LinkedIn lives with the same question. What are your top 3 take-home bits of advice for somebody in your position, or somebody who wants to make that first change?
I wish I'd prepared thoughts for this.
Everybody says the same thing.
Everyone said. I think one of the most important things is that bit, building trust. Whatever you measure, tell people why you're measuring it, and then tell them what you're going to do once you've measured it, and openly communicate that first and foremostly. If you do that on a regular basis, and when you first do it, people won't necessarily buy in as much, but if you keep doing it, people will suddenly start to build trust, because you're holding to your word. You're showing up to your word. Second thing would be to engage with and work with suppliers, because from that individual health perspective, you're going to need some flexibility. You're going to need some different offerings for people in that space, and I think that is the thing that suppliers can do really well. And whenever companies try and do it themselves, I feel like you create a huge amount of workload in something that actually you save a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of resource by working with a third party supplier. Not just buying something, but working with them to define what you want, so then you get something which is super relevant to your organization. And the third thing is, get the right people around the table and have a conversation about how you're going to move the needle on well-being. So pull together those other areas of the business, the other influences in the business for well-being, and start to build that kind of cross-functional work, because that's the only way that well-being will start to be seen as a company and a cultural thing, as opposed to a soft thing over there, if you get what I mean. So there'd be my three takeaways.
Dude, 3 pretty good takeaways, considering I've just dropped that bomb on you. I'm glad you remember building trust first, because I feel like that's been a bit of a key message behind this kind of podcast. But to be fair, all 3 of these points have been. So yeah, thank you ever so much. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate you giving me your time to do this. I wish you the best of luck for the next role, and for Saturday. Probably firstly, that you get through that well. If you want to go and support Ryan, Jake, Ryan will be there giving you food, I believe.
Yeah, he is.
If you want to
Chief Snack Officer, he's enjoying the title, I think.
Chief Snack Officer and lead banter giver from Ryan Hopkins.
So I'm just going to be doing lengths from Tower Bridge to Battersea Park. So if you see a guy looking pretty tired, carrying a lot of weight, that'll be me. So I set up from Tower Bridge at 7 a.m. I think it's going to take me 15 hours. So it's going to be pretty much the whole day of Saturday going back and forth. I'll be posting updates on LinkedIn and Instagram and stuff like that. So there'll be lots of opportunities to engage.
Yeah, 100%. So that was going to be my thing, right? Like, if you want to support you, there'll be links on your LinkedIn, on your Instagram. Your Instagram is Jake Saunders Coaching.
Jake Sanders Coaching, yeah.
Sanders Coaching, sorry, Saunders. I always had the U.
It's all right, I'm used to it now.
Jake Sanders Coaching, and LinkedIn. Obviously, you should be here now. You should find a link somewhere on this page for Jake. But dude, yeah, looking forward to seeing that. I will share as well, just so we get some awareness on that and some support for you. But no, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, cheers, Rich, and cheers, everyone.
And the next LinkedIn Live podcast is in a couple of weeks' time. We've got 2. The first one's going to be around performance with the guy who did my performance coaching qualification, Pete Turner. Actually, his name is Pete Charles Turner, which is the exact second and last name as mine, which is strange. So yeah, we're going to talk about performance and how we achieve best performance. And then we'll look at, and I'm speaking to Paul Duggan, who is the Global Wellbeing Lead at Essentia. So pretty big organization there as well. So keep your eye out for those. But thank you again, Jake. And we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
No worries. See you later, guys. Bye.